Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today, I decided to see what Mike Riddle, the Joe Biden of creationism, has been up to recently. And, well, I couldn't really find anything recent from him. All the videos, even the ones that were uploaded recently, look like old VHS tape captures. So I checked the Creation Training Initiative website to make sure that he's still with us. And it says he lives in Idaho, so my condolences on his apparent passing, and especially that he seems to have wound up in hell. Okay, Idaho people, I'll apologize if you can tell me something good about living in a state that as recently as 2019 had a governor named, I kid you not, Butch Otter. Don't get me wrong, there's worse things about that guy than his name, but y'all actually elected an anti-LGBTQ governor who is basically named masculine-presenting lesbian water weasel. Anyway, my main point here was going to be that I finally read the CTI team page for the Creation Training Initiative in order to find out if Mike was still alive, and in so doing I noticed that the entire team is completely unqualified for whatever jobs they happen to have on the team, like their finance manager having a degree in music education, for instance. But I got sidetracked with Butch Otter, so let's just go ahead and watch the interview that Mike gave on the Christ in Prophecy show. But first, a word from our sponsor, Surfshark. Hey, Vice. Hey. Whoa, what happened to you? You don't look like yourself. Actually, come to think of it, you look a bit like I did a few months ago when I kept having tech issues that you helped me with. You nailed it, Tim. You see, I got my partner a cute mushroom-shaped backflow incense burner for Mother's Day because, she likes cute mushroom things. But now, everywhere I go, I see ads for mushroom-related stuff. And some of the ads are particularly sketchy, like I'm not even sure if their product is legal in Canada. Come on, Rhino, you know how to handle that. You taught me. Just use Surfshark. Not sure how Surfshark is going to help me with that. Aren't they mostly just about hiding your internet activity from your ISP? Rhino, it's so much more than that. First, it's not just your ISP that you can hide your activity from. Connecting to public Wi-Fi can be a pretty big security risk at times. Using a VPN is an extra layer of protection that can prevent bad actors from compromising your devices. But how does that stop the mushroom ads? They're everywhere. It's gotten so bad that I can even see them when I close my eyes. Are you sure you didn't click on one of the sketchy ones? Guess that answers that. Anyway, Surfshark also has the Clean Web 2.0 feature, which blocks ads and malware before it even loads. And with the browser extension, it will even automatically reject all unnecessary cookies, so you won't even see that annoying accept cookies pop up, where websites try to convince you that allowing them to track you is somehow good for you? Right, I forgot about that. I've mostly been using Surfshark to make YouTube think I'm in the United States so I can watch videos that got blocked in Canada for some reason. With over 3,200 servers in more than 100 countries, the possibilities are endless. Can my listeners still get that awesome deal we were doing with them? They sure can. Just head over to surfshark.deals/Rhino and use promo code Rhino at checkout for 3 bonus months for free. Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee so you can try it completely risk-free. That's surfshark.deals/Rhino for 3 bonus months for free when you use the promo code Rhino at checkout. Surfshark is my longest running sponsor, so when you use my link and promo code, you're not just getting a great product for a great price, you're also helping to support my channel, so thank you.
Most evolutionists today claim that evolution is no longer a theory because it has become a proven fact.
Now, because of the type of program this is, I am inevitably going to end up cutting out a bunch of fluff like this, but I'm also going to be leaving some of it in for demonstration purposes. You see, Mike has been doing this for long enough that he should be able to correct a lot of the mistakes that the hosts of this program make, and sometimes he even makes lackluster attempts in that direction, but he lets a lot of the misconceptions slide. This supports an idea that I've had about creationism for a while now. It's a bit more cynical than I usually am, but it seems to be borne out by the behavior of the leaders of the creationist movement. It's that they don't actually care about the fact that their arguments will be misconstrued by their followers. In fact, a lot of the arguments seem deliberately crafted to accomplish that goal. Take this fact versus theory debate. Sure, if you search the Answers in Genesis website, you can find articles that address the common misconception that theory just means speculation, but you can also find articles on AIG's website that blur the lines a bit and talk about how a theory that can explain anything and everything, no matter how contradictory, really isn't science, thus reinforcing the evolution is just a theory mistake. And on this specific topic, we know that Mike is aware of the proper scientific use of the word theory, as he has explained it himself on his podcast.
So a scientific fact is about one specific aspect, but a scientific theory incorporates scientific laws, inferences, and tested hypotheses.
And not to step on my own toes for later in the video, but we see this happen in this video. One of the interviewers says to Mike,
and one of the things people talk about is that in schools, children are taught today that evolution is a fact, and it's not even a theory anymore. What do you say about that regarding the teaching that is being promulgated in schools across America?
And then Mike answers without explaining the difference between the colloquial use of the word theory or the scientific use of the word theory.
Well, before I get to whether it's a fact or theory or anything, let me give some background information.
Good.
There's things called proof and persuasion.
He goes off on that persuasion versus proof bit for a minute or so, and when he comes back around to the word theory, this is what he has to say about it.
Well, it's not a fact, can't be proven. It actually does not qualify for a scientific theory. Many different definitions of a theory, but a scientific theory must be observable and repeatable.
So, zero clarification. You can tell by the way he words it that he is aware of the difference between a scientific theory and the colloquial use of the word theory, and indeed the episode of his podcast where he explains that difference came out about 5 years before this interview was taped, so we know that he is aware of it, but he chooses not to explain it when the people interviewing him make that exact mistake. So the conclusion that I am led to from seeing this behavior repeated by creationists for years is that they aren't actually interested in providing their audience with the best arguments. They want the takeaway from their lengthy talks to be a pithy soundbite that can be used as a thought-stopping technique by their adherents. Something easy to say that dismisses the entire argument without them having to think about it all that much. Evolution is only a theory. Life can't come from non-life. Millions of dead things laid down by water all over the earth, etc. Now, sure, they do have arguments that they can use that expand on these and attempt to solidify these points, and the average creationist will probably be somewhat familiar with them, so when someone starts explaining transitional fossils, they don't need to worry about the specifics. They can just say, Piltdown Man was a hoax, and move on with their lives, secure in the knowledge that the creationist organizations have put in the effort to prove that evolution is wrong, so they don't have to. And again, I'd just like to emphasize that this is conjecture on my part. I can't prove that Mike actually remembers or even understands the distinction between the different uses of the word theory. He could just be confidently ignorant. I'm not in his head, so I don't know for sure. AIG might have those different articles that sometimes use the word theory in the scientific sense and sometimes in the colloquial sense, purely because their archive is just so big that they can't be bothered to make sure that everything is consistent. So this might just be a case of ignorance, incompetence, and motivated reasoning, but it happens with enough frequency that I suspect otherwise.
Tell us what kind of background and qualifications you have to be presenting teaching on evolution and creation, this particular topic.
My first and most important qualification is I'm a born-again believer, believe in
Amen.
Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior.
Yes.
That's number one. Everything else is secondary.
Yep, there you have it from his own mouth. He is not qualified to talk about evolution, as he thinks that belief in Jesus is the number one qualification for that. I'm sorry, Mike, but if you convert someone who has never heard of evolution before and they become a born-again believer, they won't suddenly be able to articulate an argument against transitional fossils. The very existence of your organization, which seeks to train believers to be able to have these conversations, demonstrates the fact that being a believer is not a relevant qualification. And really, if specifically the young earth creationism version of Christianity were true, you would actually expect that being a believer would equip you for those conversations. Unless your God is too weak to impart actual knowledge into people once they accept him. If he wanted his followers to be equipped for that sort of discussion, he should be the ultimate equipper. But anyway, let's see what Mike considers to be his other qualifications for challenging the entire basis of our modern understanding of the biological sciences.
Well, God's given me a good gift to be able to do a lot of things. One, I was a captain of the United States Marine Corps. I worked in computers with Microsoft for many years. Some might see that as a detriment. I don't know. And I've also been an athlete. I competed worldwide in track and field. So he's given me the desire to win and be a champion. Not that I was always a champion. You take your share of losing too. But I've been working in this field of creation, evolution, and apologetics for over 35 years.
So his qualifications are that he was a Marine Corps captain, he worked with computers with Microsoft for many years, and that he can either run fast or jump high. Well, being an officer in the Marine Corps does require at least a bachelor's degree, so maybe that's relevant, but no, he's got his degree in mathematics. which actually surprised me the first time that I learned about it because he got some relatively basic math stuff wrong, like stating that the law of large numbers says that anything with a probability less than 1 in 10 to the 50th is mathematically impossible, which is just factually incorrect. Not only do events with smaller probabilities than that happen all the time, like shuffling a deck of cards where the order of the cards has a probability of about 1 in 10 to the 68th, but that's not even covered by the law of large numbers. The law of large numbers is, to put it briefly, that if you perform the same experiment a large number of times, the actual results will get closer to the expected results as time goes on. So rolling a fairly balanced 6-sided die gives you a 1 in 6 chance of getting any of those numbers. But if you roll it 6 times, you likely won't get 1 of each number. Roll it 60 times, and you likely won't have 10 of each number, but it will be closer to that than your initial rolls were to getting 1 of each number. Keep on rolling, and the more you roll, the closer the average number of times you roll any particular number will approach the expected average of 1 in 6. Anyway, all this to say that he has 0 biological qualifications, and he doesn't seem to be very adept at his mathematical qualifications either. Oh, also, he mentioned that he's been working in the creation versus evolution apologetics field for over 35 years, but working is essentially giving sermons and talks. It's not a qualification. If I were invited to give a guest lecture at a university on the subject of Darwinian evolution, I would decline that offer, because even though I have technically been working in that field for 7 years now, it's not the kind of work that gives me a valid qualification for speaking on the subject with authority. From day one on this channel, I have made it a point to have high-quality sources for all of the important claims that I make. And I still do that because you should not trust some random chucklefuck who made a YouTube video as a legitimate scientific source on a subject. And yes, I do recognize the irony of saying that I use high-quality sources in a video where, thus far in the video, the only sources I've referenced are 3 Answers in Genesis articles and 1 Creation Training Initiative podcast, but since those sources demonstrate my point about them encouraging their audience's misunderstanding of their own arguments, they do count as high quality to that end.
Good. There's things called proof and persuasion. Now, persuasion is when you give evidence for an argument, even if the idea is false. You give persuading evidence for that.
So, for example, young Earth creationism? The idea itself is demonstrably false. Basically, every field of science has independently shown conclusively that the Earth cannot be a mere 6,000 years old. And yet creationists somehow manage to persuade people to believe them. Though, let's be real here, as long as I've got my cynical glasses on, they don't actually spread creationism through persuasion, they spread it through indoctrination. Raise a kid while repeating all these creationist talking points at them, and they'll be more likely to be insulated against anything that goes against those beliefs. Sometimes in the face of their beliefs being directly addressed and countered, though frequently the teachers in high school science classes will either teach the material without going out of their way to address the creationist talking points, or those teachers will themselves be creationists who then do go out of their way to teach a straw man of evolution that is easier for creationism to counter. So the kids that already live in a house steeped with creationist material will either find validation in their creationist teachers or will not be sufficiently challenged by their non-creationist teachers. Also, just for the purposes of satisfying the pedants out there, when I say cynical, I'm using the term colloquially, not philosophically. While failing to clarify that wouldn't be nearly the egregious error of failing to clarify the colloquial versus scientific usage of the word theory, it would at least be an oversight on my part, particularly in a video where I make such a big deal out of it.
Now, proof is when we give an explanation for something that is absolutely true. There's no missing gaps or any missing information in there.
Sure, I suppose, but using that strict a definition of proof leaves it squarely in the realm of mathematics. And I suspect this is intentional. Now, you can bring up any aspect of the theory of evolution that currently contains an unknown and say, aha, see, it's not proven because they don't know X. While ignoring the fact that there is no 100% proof in science. Even the mathematical aspects of science are subject to revision upon the discovery of new information. Like gravity, for instance. For all intents and purposes, gravity is a proven fact. It even has a mathematical equation that describes how it works. And that is the law of gravity. It's mathematical. It has been proven. but it's not universal. Even in Newton's day when he developed the law, it was recognized that it did not hold true for the orbit of Mercury, and it took scientists another 230 years to figure out what was going on there, which is when Einstein published his theory of general relativity. And relativity still hasn't been 100% cracked. There are unknowns there too, and gravity is at the heart of it. So we know that gravity is real. We know how it behaves. We can precisely calculate the motion of the stars and planets using it. We can make predictions. But it is still to this day subject to revision, as there are aspects about it that we do not understand. So while gravity has not been 100% proven in a mathematical sense, it's close enough as to be effectively proven. Nobody questions Newton's law of universal gravitation, despite it being relatively common knowledge that it is not, in fact, universal. It works well enough for most of our calculations, with relativity filling in the gaps when necessary. So what Mike is trying to do here with evolution is the equivalent of saying, because we don't know how gravity fits in with quantum theory, the whole theory of gravity is unproven and can be dismissed as unscientific.
Now, where does evolution fit on all this? First of all, we don't know where the matter came from. They can't prove that at all.
And there it is. That didn't take long at all. Evolution doesn't need to show where the matter came from. The theory of evolution begins as soon as self-replicating life exists. Where that life came from is completely irrelevant to the question of whether or not it evolves. It's related, sure, but as long as we can agree that life exists, then the ultimate origin of that life is irrelevant to the question of whether or not that life goes through the process of evolution. This would be like saying that understanding the process of respiration is impossible unless you first understand the process of reproduction, because if an organism doesn't reproduce, then its descendants are not going to be around to breathe. Now, sure, that is technically speaking true, but it's irrelevant. We can grant that reproduction happens in order to get into how breathing works, regardless of our level of understanding of reproduction.
Well, they don't know how stars or galaxies form. They have ideas, but they're only ideas. No one's ever seen a star or galaxy form.
That's even less relevant to evolution than the origin of life. Though I suppose he did say where matter came from rather than where life came from, so I guess we're just going through Kent Hovind's 6 kinds of evolution, 3 of which aren't even remotely related to evolution, the 4th of which is only related in the sense that life has to exist before it can evolve, and the final 2 being the division of evolution into the micro and macro categories, a practice that creationists seem to use exclusively to allow for their worldview to accept that evolution is a demonstrable fact without accepting evolution itself, because no matter how much of it we demonstrate to be true, it's always just microevolution. Because there is no well-established dividing line between micro and macro evolution, they get to keep shifting the goalpost to deny evolution as a whole, while simultaneously accepting more and more of the parts of it that we keep demonstrating, but under the guise of only accepting microevolution. Also, it's not that we only have ideas about how stars and galaxies form. We have seen stars in every stage of their life cycle, from stellar nursery to dense gas clumps to young stars to old stars to supernovae, and all the stages in between all of those ones. We have not, it is true, directly witnessed the exact moment of ignition where fusion begins in the star's core, but to say that we don't know how they form, we only have ideas because we haven't actually seen that exact moment, would be like saying that new babies are impossible because while we have seen all the stages of life, from sex to gestation to childhood to adulthood to death, and all the stages in between, we have never actually seen the exact moment where a sperm fertilizes the egg, so it just doesn't happen. And yes, I know that we have seen that. This is a hypothetical to make a point. If it makes you feel better, picture a group of observing extraterrestrials. They watch us from the skies and they see all of these stages of human life, but they have no way of seeing inside the body to the moment of conception. So they conclude that no new humans are ever created. Our population was at its peak whenever God created us. There are no more of us now than there were then, and many of us have died since then, so there's actually less. That would be completely absurd. And yet that is exactly the type of reasoning that Mike relies on to say that we don't know how stars form. As to how galaxies form, it's a byproduct of star formation. Gravity exists, so things clump together. Stars are things, so they clump together into galaxies. Astronomers might hate that oversimplification, but that is basically it.
They don't know how life originated. Our best scientists can't produce a protein, let alone a living cell.
Okay, there's the origin of life one. In addition to what I've already said about it, I find it interesting that Mike is putting it into terms of what our best scientists can do in a lab. I mean, First off, we've been synthesizing proteins since the mid-2000s, and the first life with a fully synthetic genome was created in a lab in 2010, with synthetic life forms known as xenobots that were designed by AI and are able to self-replicate coming onto the scene in 2020. So the claims that we can't make proteins or life in a lab are both false. But more importantly, who the fuck cares? What modern scientists are able to do in a lab is completely irrelevant to what is possible in nature. That would be like someone in the 1500s saying that no stars could possibly exist beyond those that we can see with the naked eye, purely because scientists of the day were unable to create a telescope. Or that the existence of the sun is impossible because human scientists are unable to create a sustained fusion reaction that puts out more energy than is required to start it in a lab. As it turns out, what is possible in nature is not limited by current human capabilities.
The fossil record does not support that because we know fossilization happens rapidly.
I had to go back and re-watch that to see if there was something he said that I missed, because how rapidly a fossil forms is completely irrelevant to the fossil evidence for evolution. And fossilization can happen rapidly, but it's not consistent. There are some processes that we've known about for years that can fossilize an organism shockingly quickly. The Medusa effect was first written about in 1989, and is a process where the actions of bacteria can replace a dead organism's soft tissue with calcium phosphate in a matter of hours to days, providing us with some of the most detailed fossils we've ever found. Of course, this does not automatically mean that all fossils form this way. Certainly, there were plenty of fossils that formed in the good old-fashioned rapid burial followed by hundreds, thousands, and yes, even millions of years of permineralization way. But that's not the only way to get a fossil. How long a fossil took to become permineralized is highly dependent upon the local conditions, the pH of the material it was buried in, the mineral content of the groundwater, the pH of the rain in the area, and so on. So yeah, some fossils form quickly, others form slowly, and neither is a requirement of or a refutation of evolution.
So when we look at this, the evolution model, they have holes everywhere. So what is it? Well, it's not a fact, can't be proven. It actually does not qualify for a scientific theory. Many different definitions of a theory, but a scientific theory must be observable and repeatable.
No, that is not the definition of a scientific theory. A scientific theory is a well-substantiated explanation of some aspect of the natural world that can incorporate facts, laws, inferences, and tested hypotheses. Or at least that's the definition of theory that Mike gave when he wasn't directly facing an interview who was making the evolution is just a theory mistake. The definition he gave here for theory is closer to the definition of fact, an observation that has been repeatedly confirmed and for all practical purposes is accepted as true, with the caveat in science that truth is never final, so it's always possible that something that is considered a fact today may be modified or discarded upon further scientific discovery.
Where in evolution have we repeated any of those?
Where in evolution have we repeated those? How about the unicellular algae that, in response to a filter-feeding predator, evolved the characteristic of multicellularity in order to increase their size beyond what the filter feeder was capable of consuming? That actually happened twice independently in the same experiment, with each colony of algae going about it in a slightly different way. Notably, the characteristic of multicellularity was stably heritable. That is, they removed the predator that provided the selection pressure to increase in size, and kept the algae breeding for several years after the initial experiment, and they retained the trait of multicellularity. This is supposedly one of the big hurdles that evolutionists have yet to overcome, the development of multicellularity from single-celled organisms. But we observed it in a lab almost 5 years ago now. Generally, the objection to this one from creationists has been that algae sometimes form colonies that appear to behave as though they are a single organism, while still remaining separate, so it's not really that big a change, with the distinguishing feature here being that all of the algae cells in the multicellular version originate in the same extracellular matrix. Think of it like an algae skin. And all the cells are also genetically identical to each other. But given the colonial nature of some algae, the change from separate algae cells working together to algae cells within the same extracellular matrix working together isn't that big a leap, and honestly, that actually supports evolution. We would not expect multicellularity to happen out of nowhere. There would have been evolutionary precursors to it, and an organism that can work together to form colonies is a prime candidate for taking that next step. But it is, indeed, that next step. It went from separate individual algae cells that sometimes form colonies but sometimes don't, to several genetically identical algae cells trapped together within the same cellular skin, which passes this trait of multicellularity on to its descendants so that they grow in the same way. So yeah, don't tell me that we haven't observed or repeated aspects of evolution.
Well, obviously, even Adolf Hitler and some of the Nazi philosophy borrowed from evolution to say that there was a master race, and that was very grounded in Darwin's teachings from that day and age.
Exactly.
Oh goody, it's Godwin. Can creationists just come to grips with the fact that evolution is not the same thing as social Darwinism? Now, sure, social Darwinism was based on evolution, but it's pretty much universally agreed nowadays that social Darwinism is bad. And honestly, the people who disagree with that statement are far more likely to align politically with creationists than with atheists. So if you're going to argue that acceptance of evolution leads to social Darwinism, which leads to things like white supremacy and Nazism, then I'd have to ask you why the demographic that is most likely to accept evolution is also significantly less likely to belong to the same political party as the white supremacists and neo-Nazis. And really, all of this is a distraction. Even if I grant that a belief in evolution was 100% responsible for the Holocaust, that doesn't mean that evolution is false. At worst, it means we need to be extremely careful with how we approach the subject so as to avoid that outcome in the future. But did Hitler believe in evolution? Well, depends what setting you asked him in. Turns out, he was manipulative as fuck. The same goes for religion, actually. Often a similar argument goes that atheism leads to Nazism because Hitler was an atheist. And the counter to that has generally been to point out all the Christian symbolism he made use of while in power, invoking Christianity in his speeches, flat out saying things like, "We tolerate no one in our ranks who attacks the ideas of Christianity. In fact, our movement is Christian," and keeping the "God with us" belt buckles for certain military branches. But privately, he did dislike Christianity. He was very much into the occult, so I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to call him an atheist, but regardless of his private beliefs, I find it more telling that he felt it necessary to hide his private dislike of Christianity in order to pretend publicly that Nazism was a Christian movement in order to accomplish his heinous crimes.
You mentioned drawings. It seems to me like evolutionists that's what they base their whole thing on, is drawings.
Right, because we don't find
find
too many
one
complete
tooth.
fossils. Yes,
And draw a whole human being from that one truth.
called Nebraska Man.
So the thing about Nebraska Man is that even the paleontologist who originally published the analysis that concluded the tooth was from an anthropoid ape rejected the drawing, with the New York Times reporting on his and his colleagues' low opinion of the drawing, stating that it was a figment of the imagination of no scientific value and undoubtedly inaccurate. If all we have are drawings, then why do the scientists who find the actual fossils condemn the drawings as inaccurate when they are? And the paper that concluded that the tooth was an ape was retracted 5 years later because it was actually a pig tooth. This is called changing to accommodate new data, and it's a good thing. You should learn how to do it sometime.
Well, they also had drawings of a series of embryos that made it look like we went through stages of development that were very animalistic, and those were just fantasized drawings. They were not even based in reality whatsoever, and yet they found their way into many textbooks until recent years.
And actually, they do still have that suggestion in the textbooks today, even though it's been proven false for well over 100 years.
Remember just a moment ago when they were complaining that evolutionists keep changing the story when they get new data? No, of course you don't. Why would you remember a part of the video that I skipped over? Anyway, here's the relevant bit.
Well, it seems to me like every time I pick up something these days or see an article on the internet, somebody is backing off, who is an evolutionist, is backing off and saying, well, we've got a new explanation, a new explanation. What's going on there?
What's going on there is that scientists update their models to account for new data. But if that's a problem, then why are you now complaining that they don't change their story when they do get new data? Also, Haeckel was trying to prove an idea known as recapitulation, which held that as an embryo develops, it goes through stages that resemble the adult forms of all the animal's evolutionary ancestors. As far as it's still being taught today, I think you're just flat out wrong there. Unless textbooks are still mentioning it as an idea that was once very prominent but is no longer, because, like you said, it began to fall out of favor among evolutionary scientists in the early 1900s, with it being referred to as biological mythology by the mid-1900s.
But some of the things they will not back on. Even though the Big Bang has scientific problems, they won't back off on it. And the reason why is they don't have anything to replace it.
It's not so much that the Big Bang has so many problems that we need something to replace it, it's that there just are unknowns about the Big Bang. All the data we do have points to the Big Bang being the origin of the universe, but we do have some stuff to figure out about what happened before the Big Bang. There are no problems with the Big Bang that are fatal to the theory as a whole. The problems lie entirely in unanswered questions. It is incredibly unlikely that the answer to any of these questions will falsify the whole theory, but if one of them should, then you can bet that at that time scientists will revise their position. What it comes down to is that we have a model that perfectly explains the behavior of the universe, with the exception of the singularities at the centers of black holes and the singularity that came before the Big Bang. We don't throw out the whole theory because there's a couple of unknowns.
If the Earth is so young, why does it look old?
Well, here's my answer to that question. And I like to use biblical and tactics that we see in, that's where I get all my information from. Science is the secondary, but the Bible's my first thing.
Yeah, and that's why you're wrong. If you take the word of a thousands of years old religious text over modern science on matters of modern science, you're going to be wrong. That's just how it is, whether you like it or not.
Radiometric dating, how they date rocks and fossils, we don't need to go into that right now. But they use a tool for measuring and counting atoms in there. Well, what they're not teaching here in the schools is this whole idea of radiometric dating is based on assumptions. It's not a fact. You can date one rock, 3 different methods, come up with 3 completely different ages.
Yeah, sometimes you can do that. And do you know what researchers do when that happens? They discard those dates as erroneous because something happened to the sample that messed with the dates. But if proper dating procedures are followed, they can get incredibly accurate dates. In some of the best examples, we have things like ice cores with dates that have been confirmed with literally dozens of independent dating methods, some radiometric and some not.
God created Adam and Eve, and if they were created as adult human beings, if you and I had looked at them, we'd estimate, I'd figure he's about 25, maybe 30 years old. But they were brand new.
That's right.
And by the same token, trees, if we'd cut them down, they would have had rings just to provide support, but they were brand new. So there was a semblance of age, just according to our way of looking at things, that didn't mean that they were any older than brand new.
In other words, God actually went out of his way to hide the fact that he created the Earth young, making it not just appear to be old, but also to measure as old when using completely different and independent methods. This God character doesn't sound like he wants us to figure out that the Earth is young.
The fossil record and all this evolution is really staying alive because of one main, well, there's several reasons, but the most important one is the education system.
Yep, we educate people with actual scientific facts and data, and that's why our understanding of science stays alive. You say that like it's a bad thing.
They're more important to them, it's more important to teach evolution than true observable science.
Well, as I pointed out earlier, evolution is true observable science. Now, do you know what's not observable? God. And I'm not saying that thing that apologists always like to straw man, where if I can't see it visually, it must not exist, where they can escape by saying, well, you can't see air either, but you still breathe it. I mean that God is completely undetectable in any way, and the behaviors attributed to him are erratic at best.
But when we look at the fossil record, what do we see? Most all fossils are found in sediments laid down by water. This is all over the Earth.
Yeah, see? There's one of those quick thought-stopping phrases. Never mind that water is literally a requirement of the permineralization process. It's what carries the minerals into the organism that eventually replace the organic tissues. Given how fossilization happens, it would be more of a surprise if most of them were not in water.
What might that bring up as a clue?
Noah's flood.
Right. See, it matches what the Bible teaches.
Superficially, maybe, but when you look at it in more detail, it turns out that water doesn't just mean a big amount of water covering the whole area. It could be a river, a beach, a mudslide, a swamp, an alluvial fan or delta. We can tell the difference between shallow marine and deep marine ecosystems as well. All of this would be impossible if the fossils were the result of one single flooding event. There wouldn't be a myriad of environments to find these fossils in. There would be one single environment no matter where we look. But that's not what we see.
We find fossils of apes, we find fossils of humans, but we don't find any factual fossils of anything in between.
Funny you should say that. because as it turns out, creationists can't agree on where the line is between apes and humans in their own research journals. Dr. Todd Wood, writing in the Answers Research Journal, categorized Australopithecus sediba as a human and said that it should be renamed to Homo sediba. Also writing in the Answers Research Journal, Anne Habermel and Drs. David DeWitt and David Menton said that they disagree about sediba being categorized as human. So if there really are no transitional fossils and the line between apes and humans is so crisp and clear, then why can't creationists agree on where that line even is?
You don't
Only
find any
textbooks.
dots between a dog and a cat.
No, we don't.
No, we don't, nor would we ever expect to. If you didn't hear that clearly, he apparently said we don't find any ducks between a dog and a cat. That's wrong for several reasons. First, cats and dogs are way more closely related to each other than either is to ducks, so we wouldn't expect a duck to be part of the transition between cats and dogs. Second, cats and dogs are not ancestors to each other, so there is no between for them in the evolutionary sense. Third, all three are contemporaneous to each other. And while we do sometimes find representatives of a transition in close proximity and sometimes with some temporal overlap, we wouldn't actually expect all of the members of a major transition between animals as different as cats, dogs, and birds to exist simultaneously. There are more problems with it than that, and a lot of the problems I have to just make false assumptions that are also problematic in order to show why that assumption is problematic, but you get the idea.
Many young Earth advocates have a hard time explaining how in the world the millions of light years of distance that separates us from stars, supposedly, can be explained. In other words, how did that light get here over millions and millions of light years separation?
My favorite part there is the supposedly that he threw out after the millions of light years. I'm wondering if he actually denies that the distance between the stars is real, or if he just has a compulsion to add a qualifier after anything that contains the phrase millions of years, and doesn't realize that a light year is a measurement of distance.
But I'm going to say this. There's two ways to answer that question. There's one answering it to a believer, and there's another way to answer it to an unbeliever.
Okay.
To a believer, I'm going to ask him this question. Do you believe that the Bible is God's word?
And the believer could say yes to that and still believe in the Big Bang, evolution, and that all the stars are far away. Because the Bible doesn't actually speak to science, and if you try to make it, you wind up looking ridiculous.
Well, yes, the believer's going to say yes. Then what's the problem with God getting that light here?
Oh, there's no problem with his having the ability to do that. The problem is with the question of why he would do that. He puts stars out there that are too far away for us to see based on the speed of light that he allegedly decided upon himself. He could have made the speed of light faster so that we'd be able to see everything sooner. He could have created a smaller universe. He could also have just created everything the same, with the visible universe expanding as it does now to allow us to see farther with each passing year, but with the farthest away objects that we can see being in alignment with when he actually created everything. But instead, he chose to create in a way that would deceive us into thinking that the universe is old because that's how he made it. That's the issue here. It's not that they don't think it's possible for him, it's the question of why he would do it in a way that confirms secular science instead of biblical science.
Now, to an unbeliever, I'm going to have a different kind of question, different way to approach it. I'm going to say that is a good question again. But you know, there's only two ways to answer that. Again, it's a belief in a creator God who created everything in 6 days, as the Bible teaches. Or the other possible way is through naturalistic sciences, naturalistic processes.
Here's the thing, though. God could have chosen to create the universe in a way where the study of science would lead us to the conclusion that God created the universe 6,000 years ago. But he didn't. In your worldview, he created the universe in a way that would lead an unbiased study of the science of cosmology to the conclusion that the universe is 13.7 billion years old. So in this scenario, you're talking to an unbeliever. Why should I, as an unbeliever, accept the word of the Bible over actual observational data? In the beginning of this interview, you were all about things that are observable and repeatable. Well, you can go outside on any clear night and repeatedly observe the Andromeda Galaxy, a galaxy that is so far away that light would have to have been traveling for millions of years in order to get to us. But now that you've run into something that so clearly demonstrates the fact that the universe is older than 6,000 years, you suddenly abandon the requirements that your data be repeatable and observable in favor of just the pure assertion that God just made the universe look old for some unknown reason. It's a prime example of moving the goalposts.
My choice is I believe in a creator God who created everything out of nothing, created all the stars, the galaxies, and he did this in 6 days, and he created the stars on day 4. Now, what is your answer to all this?
You didn't answer the question, though. The question was, how do you account for the fact that we can directly look at objects that have to have existed for millions to billions of years in order for us to even be able to see them in the first place? The answer that you just gave is not going to convince anyone. You just basically said, well, I believe God. That's the end of it.
What do you mean by science? Because according to all the dictionaries I read and the science textbooks, science means observable and repeatable. So could you supply me some evidence for how that light got here? And it's got to be empirical science, mean observable and repeatable, because it seems you have some assumptions in what you told me.
Okay, this sounds like he's just flat out denying that the distant objects in the universe are as far away as they actually are, as though he believes that everything in the universe is really within 6,000 light years of Earth, and the science that tells us otherwise isn't observable or repeatable, which is just flat out wrong? Like, I don't even know how to respond to this one. That's a level of science denial that is just astonishing, and honestly, I'd expect that sort of thing from flat earthers more than young Earth creationists, though there is certainly some overlap there. Are you a flat earther, Mike? Answers in Genesis doesn't even deny the size of the universe. Do you?
First of all, you said the light travels this far, and that it can travel so far in a year. But the question I have is you can't get a correct measurement unless you know when that star was actually formed, and how it was formed, and where the matter came from to form that star.
Okay, that sounds like he's saying that you can't know how far away something is from you unless you know when and how that thing was formed in the first place. Again, I don't even know what to do with that, and I'd encourage Mike to not drive anymore if he's that bad with determining distances.
Problem is, they can't do that using empirical science. All they can do is use assumptions.
Well, Answers in Genesis disagrees. I'll leave a link to a paper in the Answers Research Journal that explains how we know the universe is as big as those dirty secular astronomers say it is. But my main point here is that this is such a well-accepted and well-evidenced aspect of astronomy that not even the most noteworthy creationists will deny it. Now, as it is pointed out in the AIG paper that I'm linking to, the distant starlight problem is a bigger problem for creationists than most people really think it is. Most people would say that we shouldn't see anything more than about 6,000 light years away, plus a bit to account for the expansion of the universe. But they say that that's not enough. In order for Adam to have seen stars on day 6, with the stars being created on day 4, there would have to be other stars that exist within 2 light days of Earth. Since the closest star is 4 light years away, then even the closest star to ours is too far away to fit within the biblical narrative. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the technical details of how astronomical distances are measured, but there are several ways that this is accomplished. Stellar parallax, moving cluster parallax, statistical parallax, the distance equation with standard candles, spectroscopy, the binary star method, pulsar dispersion, eclipsing binaries, and a bunch more. And all of it is repeatable and observable.
I find that most professing Christians today have surrendered to science.
Yes.
And there you have it. Creationism is anti-science. Old dude whose name I've forgotten said it, and Mike agreed.
Because when God looked back on his entire creation after day 6, he called it very good or exceedingly good, so that Hebrew means. Did he really call millions and billions of years of death, decay, and disease very good? If that's his very good, then why do we want to go to heaven?
Excellent question. But even after the fall, he does things like commanding and committing genocide, endorsing slavery, treating rape as though it's a property crime against the father or husband of the victim, allows his most faithful servant to be tormented for years just to win a bet, say that he has not come to bring peace but a sword, accepted human sacrifice, and more. So if that is the character and nature of God, why would we want to go to heaven to worship him?
Well, if you're using science to interpret Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, then to be consistent, you have to use science to interpret the rest of the Bible.
Sure.
Which means
no miracles.
I couldn't have said it better myself. The rest of their video is basically just them fighting against Christians who are Christianing wrong, and I don't have a horse in that race, so I'm just going to leave it here. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Rain Smith, who says, mistakes will happen? That's a silly argument. We don't use that argument in science, education, engineering, or anything. There are people I can think of who deserve death. You seemingly can't. That's the real point of contention. For context, this was on a short that I put out where I pointed out that PragerU is being inconsistent when it comes to trusting the government. They will argue at one moment that the government screws up everything it even touches, but then suddenly when it comes to the death penalty, they will say that the government won't make mistakes in the gathering and interpreting of evidence because DNA evidence exists. There are many reasons to be against the death penalty, but the point of contention here is not whether or not certain people deserve death. I will freely admit that there are a select few people whose deaths will actually make me happy. Some of those people are convicted criminals, others are not. The point of contention here is how many innocent people you're willing to kill in order to satisfy the base urge for retribution. My answer to that is 0. Yours is apparently greater than 0. The fact of the matter is that when you look at the data, retribution is the only reason to carry out the death penalty, and mistakes absolutely will be and are being made. And honestly, as an atheist, a life sentence without the possibility of parole is a harsher punishment than death. So not only does eliminating the death penalty leave us with the opportunity for potential future exoneration, it's actually a more effective, if less emotionally satisfying, form of retribution. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to go to surfshark.deals/rhino for 83% off a Surfshark subscription and 3 bonus months for free. Thanks to Tim Robertson for being my Patreon and sponsorship manager, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the arguments intentionally worded to lead people to the flawed bumper sticker phrase that is my channel. If you'd like to only be useful as a thought-stopping technique, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/vicerhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is where you'll also find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time! For 83% off a Surfshark subscription. 83% off a Surfshark subscription. Surfshark subscription. Surfshark subscription. Surfshark subscription.